So the way the story goes, now we have more of the war goddess version of Inanna on this morning star side of things, as far as this ancient 4,000-year-old myth goes. So Venus emerges, or Inanna emerges, and finds her husband completely unbothered, living it up happily on her throne, living large, not even concerned that his wife has been gone, not trying to find her, not as seemingly missing her, and this makes Inanna very angry. Stay with me. My name is Aleena, and I am the astrologer for creatives and changemakers, and you are listening to Promethea Astrology. Today, we're talking about Venus. Venus is the planet of love, beauty, romance, harmony, sensuality, all of the fine, beautiful, feminine things. She is the second closest to the sun and one of the two benefics in astrology, the planets that want to do good, lovely things for us. In general, what Venus means, Venus is your style of love and romance, your aesthetic. She is relational love. This could be friendship or also romantic. She is sensuality, sexuality, all of the finer things in life, and earthly pleasure, dance, music, art, architecture, anything that is meant to be experientially pleasing is something that Venus would rule over. This could also be relationships with other humans. Venus is associated with desire, attraction, magnetism, that feeling that intense beauty has that can just call you in and grip you. Venus does not go forth boldly and take what she wants. No, Venus is simply radiating beauty and desire that pulls in what she is looking for. Venus is receptive and magnetic. Venus is also harmony and peace, balance, relaxation, softness. Venus is also associated with money and can represent in her placement and aspects what your relationship to money might be like, as another sort of embodiment of earthly material pleasures that can afford you these finer things in life. In the Greek pantheon, Venus would be Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, romance, desire, procreation. Venus can also be associated with fertility. As far as Venus's astronomy, Venus is the second closest planet to the sun, starting with Mercury, then Venus, then Earth. Venus is our closest neighbor. So when you look out into the sky, Venus looks like the brightest star in the sky, but she's not always visible. So because Venus is closer to the sun than we are, and quite close to the sun in general, she can never be, this is just the way the astronomy and the orbital positions and everything works out, she can never be in the zodiac more than 48 degrees away from the sun. That would mean that your Venus sign is always going to be either the same as your sun sign, one sign away from your sun sign on either side, or maximally two signs away on either side. And I talked about this concept of being under the beams of the sun in one of my previous videos on Mercury that I will link here, because Mercury, being the closest to the sun, can actually never be more than one sign away. So Mercury will always be either the same sign as your sun sign or one sign away. But Venus can be up to two signs away because she's a little bit further from the sun. But when you are quite close to the sun as a planet in the sky, as a star, the sun is extremely bright, very bright, brightest thing out there. So when a planet becomes within 15 degrees of the sun, this is called under the beams of the sun, then you can no longer see that planet because it is washed out by the brightness of the sun. So in astronomy or astrology, we call Venus being up to 46, 48 degrees away from the sun her maximum elongation period. This will be when she is the brightest, most visible star in the sky. And Venus can either be a morning star or an evening star in this way. So if Venus is maximally on this side of the sun, maybe a morning star, and if Venus is maximally on this side of the sun, then she'll be an evening star. And when she gets very close to the sun here, then this would be when she is sort of washed out under the beams of the sun. And then Venus directly conjunct the sun would be a Venus cazimi. So if Venus is ahead of the sun, then you will see her in the morning before the sunrise, while it's still dark in the early morning, because she can never be too far from the sun. Or if Venus is after the sun, then she will come out after sunset and be an evening star. And this has to do with which side of the sun in zodiacal order Venus is on at any given point. So in very, very ancient times, people actually did not realize that Venus was one star. They thought that she was two different stars, either a morning star, this was a different star, or an evening star, not the same Venus. But I believe the Babylonians and the Mesopotamians worked out that actually Venus is the same star. And this is kind of difficult to do if you can imagine ancient times without all of the equipment and technology that we have just through observation. Realizing that this is actually the same star all along would be kind of confusing to figure out. So there's this very ancient myth of Inanna, and this is a 4,000-year-old myth where people had this story of Venus, and at this point she was not called Venus, she was called Inanna, the goddess Inanna. And by the time the Greeks came around and assigned Venus to be Aphrodite, she was just the goddess of love, romance, beauty, harmony, all these things. But back 1,000 or 2,000 years prior to this, Venus as Inanna was actually not only the goddess of love and peace and beauty, but also the goddess of war. And whether or not she was more of the war goddess or the love goddess depended on whether or not she was a morning or evening star. And the mythology that goes along with this is called the myth of Inanna. So this is a very interesting mythology that you can look at your birth chart with and start to see where your Venus is in this cycle to sort of apply what style of Venus might be integrated into the fabric of who you are. So the way the story goes is that Inanna, goddess in the sky, descends into the underworld. She's going to her sister's husband's funeral, I believe. So this would be the evening star version of Inanna, of Venus. So if you were born when Venus is an evening star, when she comes out after sunrise, when she is behind the sun, then you would have this more kind of innocent, pure, young, uninitiated, almost childlike love of beauty and harmony and romance that has this almost naive tinge to it. It's a purity. It's a Venus that has not seen darkness yet, that has not been initiated, that is the brightest light in the night sky before she's seen death in the underworld. So this would be if you were born with Venus in the maximum elongation period. So if your Venus is about over 40 degrees between this 40, maximally 48, 46 degrees away from your sun, then you were born when Venus was at her peak power. This could be on either side of the sun, but if she was an evening star, then it would be this beginning of the myth phase of Venus, where she is in her Venusian, her Inanna goddess realm, and has not yet been to the underworld, has not yet been initiated. But either way, if you're born with this maximum elongation period, then you do have sort of peak Venusian power. So you might be particularly beautiful, you might have a particular gift or talent for the arts, maybe visual, music, dancing, something like this. When Venus is very far from the sun, then she is the brightest, the strongest, peak power. So that's something to look out in your birth chart for. So then the myth goes, she decides to go to the underworld, and as she gets closer to the sun is sort of the symbolic representation of the underworld here, because as she gets closer to the sun, you can no longer see her in the night sky. So in the mythology, this would be Inanna descending into the underworld and essentially losing power. The story goes that she had to pass through these 7 gates, and at each gate she had to relinquish a piece of clothing, jewelry. She ends up in the underworld naked and essentially powerless, and she does in fact die here. And this would be if you were born with Venus under the beams of the sun, or in this Kazemi place where Venus is in the heart of the sun. That would be a version of Venus that is in the darkness, a Venus that is not scared of the taboo, the occult, the underworld, a Venus that is up against those more challenging things in this mythology. But Venus, or Inanna, in the mythology, did have a plan for when she got to the underworld. If she were to die and not make it back, she had a plan for someone to come save her and replace her with someone else so that she could return back to the earth, to the other godly realms. So this transpires and she does make it back out. And this would be when Venus is emerging on the other side of the sun. So after this cazimi, after this conjunction, after Venus emerges from under the beams of the sun like this, she becomes instead a morning star. So now Venus is coming up before sunrise. So if you have the morning star version of Venus, then this would be the Venus who has been through it, who has died and been reborn, who has seen the dark, deep underworld and come back in this more mature, but also empowered, but also a little bit darker. Like now we have more of the war goddess version of Inanna on this morning star side of things, as far as this ancient 4,000-year-old myth goes. So Venus emerges, or Inanna emerges, and finds her husband completely unbothered, living it up happily on her throne, living large, not even concerned that his wife has been gone, not trying to find her, not as seemingly missing her. And this makes Inanna very angry. So she comes back and she sees her husband like this and condemns him to be her replacement in the underworld, and the demons drag him down and he's then stuck in the underworld, where she is now able to ascend back to her throne. And she becomes the goddess of war, Inanna. So this would be a different version of the maximum elongation period of Venus as an evening star. So if you check that out in your birth chart, this would be a very different type of still maximally strong Venusian energy, where you still probably have all of that beauty and gift and aesthetic, but it's this more kind of mature, integrated, but also somewhat dark, potentially even vengeful style of Venus slash Inanna. But then eventually in the mythology, Inanna does sort of come around and get lonely, starts to miss partnership and her husband, and then in this astronomy would be when Venus is returning back towards the sun again, and essentially the myth starts over again and Venus goes through this cycle. And this is the story, the mythology, the 4,000-year-old myth that maps onto the Venus synodic cycle, and the way that you can interpret it in your birth chart by looking at how close is Venus to your sun? Is she on the left or right side of your sun? And this is how you can work out which stage of Venus is integrated into your being through this mythology. But many astrologers do not actually really look into mythology or even think about this too much. You can also just take Venus sort of at face value without mapping the myths on. You could play around, see if it works for you, see if it seems resonant. You can look at the charts of other people as well and their phases and talk to them and see, does this really work? Is this mythology still relevant 4,000 years later? Does it seem like it's applying to people? Play around with it. Definitely drop your comments below if you have any about anything that I have talked about, or if you want to drop a little interpretation. If you're resonating with some interpretive principle, let us know. We can start learning from each other how we can interpret these different aspects of Venus's nature. Maybe if you were born under a maximum elongation period, if you calculate the number of degrees between your sun and Venus, let us know if you were born either in that cazimi period, does that resonate? If you were born in that maximum elongation period, does that resonate? If you were born with Venus under the beams, are you feeling that more kind of like shadow Venus, underworld Venus energy? This would all be very interesting for us to know, so let us know so we can learn together in the comments. And I actually am an artist and a jeweler, and I made these earrings, so I'll link below if you want to buy these earrings or other earrings from me. Love Venus, love adornment, and of course I am an astrologer. I offer astrology consultations, either 60 minutes or 90 minutes if you would like some help facilitating your experience, your relationship with these symbols, some guidance and conversation around what might be your purpose, the strengths and weaknesses, challenges and triumphs that you might experience. The 60-minute reading is more getting into the symbol of who you are, strengths, challenges, purpose, things like that. And then the 90-minute consultation is more about timing, where I start applying lots of these ancient Time Lord techniques to get into when you might experience career peaks, what transits are going to be affecting you the most in the coming year, when you might encounter or have encountered what will become the focus of your life's work, things like that. So if any of that sounds interesting, book a consultation with me below. And of course, download my zodiac graphic if you would like. That's super useful for learning astrology. And you can check out the other videos that I have in this series if you would like to keep going on this journey. I have a video out for each of the planets, or if you're listening to this at the time that I'm releasing it, then maybe not yet, but I certainly will have all of the planets out soon. And I'm also going to be going through each of the zodiac signs, the elements, the gender, the houses, the aspects. So if you would like to follow along with me on this journey or just support my work, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, it really helps me, and share with a friend if there's something you think that someone you know might get out of this. Wishing you peace and health. Thank you for being here.